Hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of Carbon Based Gaming Radio. This episode of Carbon Based Gaming Radio is brought to you by TYT Community. Sound engineering support provided by Sturbridge Sound. I'm Steve Tom Sawyer. A lot of you may know me from Twitter. A lot of you may know me from Radio Nero. A lot of you may know me from YouTube. Regardless of how you've come to know my name, one thing you should know is why I and Robin Gething decided to create Carbon Based Gaming Radio. Gamers are a lot smarter than mainstream media gives them credit for, and gamers are capable of subtle intellectual deconstruction when it comes to talking about the things that are important to them. I think for us, this was a big statement that there's a failure on so many levels to give gamers the due credit that they deserve. In terms of their thinking capacity, in terms of their ability to make informed decisions for themselves, and in many respects, in terms of the idea that games are or are not art. So this show was the antithesis to everything that exists out there as it pertains to gamer representation. We can do a better job. And this radio show is just going to be a small piece of us attempting to do that. But with all that being said, none of what I'm trying to do could be accomplished by doing it by myself. So that's why I've brought a number of really talented and really amazing people along for the ride. And one of those people is my amazing and lovely co-host, Robin. So, Robin, tell everybody why you got involved.
Well, as you were saying, that there is certainly a lack. But one of the things I would say, maybe perhaps a lack, but it's more like a coming of age. Gaming isn't growing up, it's grown. This is an industry that is larger than music, film. It's dwarfing it all. It deserves more respect and analysis than it's got. We're looking to explore that with Carbon-Based Gaming Radio.
One of the things I'm really looking forward to, Robin, is this time around, we've brought a cast of colorful characters for the ride. We're going to spontaneously and periodically talk to some of the local heroes, if you would, from the open house and the review lab stream. Tell us, if you will, your thoughts on an individual named AJ.
Am I allowed to swear? It's all right. No, AJ's pretty cool. He's a very down to earth sort of a guy. What was it we were going to do with him? He's going to be doing. Are you fucking kidding me? I quite like the idea of that.
I think initially he was, but he said that he doesn't have it in him to actually get that angry and call anyone out. So now he's working on another segment.
Oh, right. What's the segment called?
Yeah, I think he's working on something with Eric Carn's grown-up children. And
they are grown-up children, aren't they? Yes.
I don't know if I'd use the term grown-up in regards to some of the conversations I've had with them, but yeah, I can definitely see the comparison. I don't know what they're crafting up over there, but yeah, they've assured me that their top secret sauce is in fact the boss. So I'm both a little excited and terrified. We'll see how that all turns out.
Yes, I'm mainly terrified.
Yeah, well, it is them.
No, I mean, I've known AJ for a short time, but he's a very likable chap. He's a very nice guy. He's been good to me. So as long as I keep him on the right side and don't lick him in the eye, I'm sure we'll be fine.
So tell us a little bit about somebody you introduced me to, Pigeon.
Oh, yeah, Pigeon. No, he was... believe it or not, he was actually. I met him, or at least heard of him on King of Pole's stream. He was essentially going to be winning a prize that Pole was going to give him. I think it was what was the game now? Yeah, Assassin's Creed 4. Yeah. So the way I met Pigeon really was I was watching King of Pole's stream, and Ordinary Pigeon is his name on Twitter. And he was on the Pole's stream. Basically, he was like the winner of this of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. And the only problem was, of course, that at that point his mum told him to go and clean the pond. So Pole's just sitting there, kind of going, "Ordinary Pigeon, Ordinary Pigeon, are you there, bud? Are you there?" And about 5 minutes later, he's still not come back, of course. So he's had to give this prize away to somebody else. And then he sort of scooted across to my stream afterwards, and I spotted him and basically sort of I thought I'd bring him on and sort of like console him myself. He was gutted, poor guy. But he is a really funny guy. He's basically, I wouldn't say he lives in Tumblr, but he likes to just drop in there just to have a good laugh. And so he's going to be bringing a lot of those sort of things to the table when it comes to this radio show. He's going to be quite a giggle, I think.
Yeah, I think he's going to be working on some other top secret segment, but he's assured me that it's going to be quite hilarious.
I can imagine.
We'll see how both of those guys do. The very worst, if
they can be easily replaced,
right? Or if they're just such a complete and utter failure that we have to hang our heads in shame and the show ends in ruination. What we can do
is blame them.
Just fire them.
Exactly. Yes.
I was going to take it a step. Yeah, let's fire them like from a cannon.
Perfect.
Our first guest, Shaun Allan, is the former community manager of IGN and the current founder and owner of Pulp365.com. Shaun is here today to talk to us about community building, the role of video games as a vehicle for art, and the role of censorship in all of these things. Hey, Shaun, how are you today?
Pretty good, man. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm hanging in there. It's been a really crazy week.
Yeah, that it has. But it's you should just go outside, take a deep breath, go to the park for a little bit and get away from it, and you'll be all good.
Yeah, maybe blow some dandelions and count butterflies.
That's the best way to do it, man.
That's what I'm planning on. So, for everybody who kind of doesn't have an idea of who you are and what you've done, just give us a brief bio, if you will.
So I'm the founder of Pulp365.com. I'm the former community manager of IGN. Before that, I was doing community and social media at Mad Catz. Been in the industry pretty much my entire life. My dad was a part of the industry before I was born in sales, so I kind of got born into the industry and have had the unique perspective of watching it grow from both a personal level as a fan, but also from a little bit of an internal level as being part of the games industry.
So you definitely are able to comment on some of the current going-ons with a little bit of some expertise, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've had tons of experiences in the industry from working at a company from a sales perspective, from a publishing perspective. So a lot of different perspectives on things.
And if you could use one word to sum up kind of the tone of the conversations that you've seen this week, what word would you choose?
Ooh, vitriolic is probably the word that I would go for. Not a lot of positivity in these discussions and in these conversations on both sides, which is pretty disappointing to see.
So earlier this week, a prominent developer, Brianna Wu, appeared on television, and she was making some very direct accusations about a very select group of people that would definitely identify themselves as gamers. Do you feel like the representation of the things that she's talking about has been fair in how it's been covered in mainstream media since then? And do you feel like there's room for improvement in that regard? And also, maybe a part two of this, what do you feel like the role of representation and reporting should be in terms of how it affects the community? Should they be a little bit more judicious about these types of things, knowing that they're sort of setting off, like a spark within these individual communities, or do you feel like it's just kind of, it is the way it is?
There's this level for me of it's really our fault, I think, in the video games industry and as a global video game community, just people that pick up and play video games, to not have really gone as far as creating, some type of, I'm not saying foundation, or some type of community that can really, put themselves out there as a voice, and I think that you have a lot of video game press outlets. You've got IGN and GameSpot and Kotaku and all these different places, but there's not really a level of their community is held in the identical esteem as the website and has a voice and can really run that voice. And so, when you see things like one particular movement organizing around one set of ideologies or, a close enough to a set of ideologies, it kind of maintains that facelessness. And I think that press coverage, they're always going to be looking to put a face on the controversy. They're always going to be looking to put a face on different negative things that have happened. And, I really do believe that Brianna Wu should be able to say whatever she wants to say and feel how she wants to feel about things. And it's her right to go out and get press coverage. And if the press is interested in telling a particular story, then they more than have that right to do that. Where I disagree with that is I don't think that there's been an equal representation, because I believe that the movement, it's very easy to knock. I mean, it's very easy to destroy. It's very easy to put down. I myself would look at it and say, look, if one of the major people in your movement that's really driving your movement is called Fart to Continue, then you're probably going to have an issue with legitimacy. You're probably going to have an issue with being taken seriously. So it's hard, because I do see a lot of people that really want to bring the conversation back to journalistic integrity and are getting completely shouted down because of the actions of a few people, which are abhorrent, gross, terrible actions that I think that anybody would condemn. So I don't fault Brianna Wu for being aggressive in her opinions and being opinionated in a lot of those different things, but I don't think that there has been a fair representation to the other side of the conversation. I think that everyone wants to paint the other side of the conversation as, terrible and awful and all these different things, but I just think that they made the mistake of organizing around people that are idiots.
Certainly. I think one of the most interesting things for me this week was seeing how some of the very people who are levying these accusations at these gamers have been complicit or participatory in that kind of behavior themselves. For example, this week, Sam Biddle from Valleyweb tweeted out basically that he was advocating for the widespread bullying of gamers as a social trend. Do you feel like people who are in obviously a position where they have access to a platform, or they're a prominent journalist or media personality, do you think that they have a responsibility to the public to censor themselves when they're about to say something ridiculous or incendiary like that? Or do you think that just as much as Brianna has a right to express herself on a major broadcast, that a journalist has the right to advocate for the ostracization or bullying of a group of people?
Look, I think that the most important thing is that we don't run away from these conversations. I've always felt that the best thing that you could ever possibly do to show that people are misguided, or if you believe that people are misguided, is to just let them talk, is to just ask them questions respectfully and keep the conversation respectful. And hopefully, if you're doing it the right way and you're doing it in a valued way, either themselves or the people that are listening will be able to formulate their own opinions and be able to look at the situation and kind of get their own value out of that. I think that we do a great disservice to the community at large in the video gaming industry by basically patting them on the head and acting like they're kids and children and they can't think for themselves or apply common sense, that they need to be handheld to a particular conclusion without asserting for themselves. And so that's where the problem for me is. Look, if Biddle wants to say that, he's more than welcome to say that. He's more than welcome to say, let's bring back bullying. The unfortunate thing is that with him, he can go out and issue an apology. And everyone can say, okay, well, he's not representative of our movement. This guy's just a dick. But when you create this faceless movement that doesn't really have any particular place to go, doesn't really have, we want this thing, but we don't have it in writing what we want. We're not talking about what the differences would be in a world that, adheres to our vision of journalistic integrity, because there is no vision. It reminds me a lot of Occupy. When you look at a lot of the things that the Occupy movement did, All it took was to just say, okay, what's your platform? Okay, well, we don't know because we're unorganized. Okay, well, then let's attack this and destroy it and trivialize it. And there's no one ever that's going to be out there that's going to defend that. And so it's just, that people can get the run of things. But I think that there's this level of irony here where it's like, I can search Gamergate and I can pull up a tweet in 2 seconds that says, reminder, if you take hashtag Gamergate seriously, you're a fucking faggot, right? So that's someone is against that particular movement that is doing so in a vitriolic way. And I mean, if you see a lot of this stuff, it's being applauded by the anti-Gamergate people. So why is it okay that one side gets to be vitriolic as long as they feel like they're doing it to the bad guys, and who creates that definition of who's right and who's wrong? Let me be clear, flat out. Death threats, any threats against somebody's life, any threats that go against, anything that they would fear for, violence or any of those levels are horrific. And we need to get away from those things as quickly as possible. But none of this stuff helps, right? And on that level of just like, the only thing it shows me is that there's a conversation to run away from.
Don't you feel like on some level, certainly, like I'm a journalist, I would never dream of insulting my readership or insulting, because Gawker also runs Kotaku. So
yeah, exactly.
He's advocating for widespread, mistreatment of their parent company's audience in a very realistic way because they run a gaming site. So don't you feel like somebody like that, when they're basically crossing the line between making something a political issue to then become a personal issue, when does that line of integrity, start bleeding into the world of exacting out punishments for abhorrent behavior?
Well, I've always said it. I think that we need a better medium to discuss a lot of this stuff than Twitter. We need a better platform for debate, and we need to create a platform ourselves, between all of our communities. And
all those things being said, when do you feel like we have the ability to hold someone to rights for saying stupid, asinine things on social media?
I think that at any time, I mean, look, it's the same thing that's always been said about free speech. You're free to say whatever you want. You are not free of consequences of those things. And I think Biddle definitely got his fair share of ire for those consequences. But like, I do feel that there is a level of unbalance here, as I think you legitimately have people that wanted to talk about and have a conversation about integrity in journalism in an intelligent and an articulate way. Those people are being shouted down because they're being categorized with the worst of the worst type of people. And there's nobody there, because the movement was not built on any foundation or structure, there's nobody there to really say, hey, there are intelligent people that are trying to raise flags about something, and you know what, maybe they did use the wrong hashtag, maybe they did get involved in the wrong group, but they have something to say. And even if that something to say is fucking you consider irrelevant, it's the value of having an open-ended community to not be afraid of those particular things. So I do think that we need to look at stuff like what Biddle said and what a lot of these people said. I'm looking at a tweet right now. RIP hashtag Gamergate. Drowned in Mountain Dew in its own sweat. Somebody responds, the funeral ceremony for Gamergate is someone giving Adam Baldwin a swirly in his own master bathroom. Now, to me, that seems so condescending, seems so pretentious, so self-absorbed. Can we get to the point where we can have conversations about this stuff and we can issue condemnations without trying to play to our own smug sense of self-satisfaction? Man, I really put those Gamergate guys down. I really made the world a better place by telling a Gamergate person to fuck off, by calling them gay, by doing the exact opposite of what I should be doing. On that level, I say, let's call things for what they are in every situation, but let's advocate for an environment and a platform that is positive and is not cynical and is not, aggressive in all of these different ways.
So one of the big kind of larger issues in terms of the gaming industry, and in a larger sense the tech and startup culture, is that the arbiters of a lot of these decisions and a lot of these platforms are all residing in 1 7 square mile kind of bubble within San Francisco. How do you think myopia like that affects representation of specific cultures? And do you think that those things kind of have a cumulative granular effect from the people who are operating inside or within that privilege.
Honestly, I'm just happy that you used the word arbiter, because as soon as you said that, I just was like, man, I really want to play the HD of Halo 2 right now, and then I just zoned. No, I think that, look, man, from my experiences in the video gaming industry, especially from the publishing aspect in working at IGN, everything is in San Francisco. Everything is in that 7 mile by 7 mile radius. So I think the first thing that we need to look at is when we're having a conversation about journalistic integrity, and we want to talk about journalistic integrity, we need to have a realistic outlook of what journalistic integrity in the video games industry looks like. Because I do think that it's unfair to say, hey, if you're a person that writes about video games, you're not allowed to hang out with anybody that's a developer. You're not allowed to have a physical relationship with anybody that is a developer. You're not allowed to do any of this stuff, right? So, we're basically saying, hey, we want all of these different gaming personalities and we want to celebrate these different gaming personalities, but then we want to punish them when they are trying to promote themselves or they are trying to have a larger platform, trying to compete for a larger platform. And so I think that with that categorization, when you look at some of this stuff like the Zoe Quinn thing, dude, I fucking rolled my eyes at that. What does a person's personal life have to do with anything? And yeah, dude, maybe there are some overlaps with those different things, but the more that you start to, draw a light onto people's personal lives, I guarantee you, dude, as a community manager for IGN, if you looked at my entire history, you would find some things that you could probably classify as ethics violations. Now, were they unethical? Did I do anything unethical? Never. Not to my knowledge did I do anything that was ethically, but if you want to pick and choose and split hairs, it's all there. And it's simply because of that 7 miles by 7 miles. So we need to take a step back and say, these people, they're writing with each other, they're engaging with each other. So what that they're communicating on the same email groups? So what that they're talking to each other? We, as the games industry, allowed this to happen. Nobody stopped this from happening. Nobody said we need to diversify the locations in which all of these things are happening. But then we want to blame these people for circumstance that's existed over decades. So that level of journalistic integrity, just let go. Let writers be writers. Let games journalists be games journalists, on that level. But secondarily to that, I think that what we need to do is, we need to advocate that there is a larger breadth of audience, that there is a larger scope of things. IGN and their parent company, Ziff Davis, has basically monopolized globally, right? You've got everything from IGN Spain to IGN Benelux to IGN Italy, right? So, I can't blame a business for trying to globalize their brand. I can't blame Polygon for doing that. I can't blame GameSpot for doing that. They're all trying to make money, and they're all trying to compete for the same piece of pie. But we have this level of, they're what, 0.00001% of people that play video games. And there are all of these other people out there that have voices and valued opinions. What we need to do is figure out how we get those voices into the conversation and stop talking about how we get certain voices out of the conversation.
So I think one of the things that we can kind of draw from, the arc of this conversation is that there is a large problem with the subtlety of censorship as it exists right now.
Mm-hmm. I like the way you put that, subtlety of censorship.
Well, thank you. Do you think that we're kind of reaching this epic of what this generation defines as like the totality of that? Or do you think that we've maybe just hit a point, where we're all hypervigilant and oversensitive to, perceived breaches of our freedoms of expression or perceived breaches of our freedom of speech? Where is it a perception of a problem and where is it an actual problem?
I look at the level of a couple things, right? Anytime you're on the internet, you have to know you're on the internet, right? And internet abuse, threats, all of these different things, they're not indicative of just the video games industry or even primarily the video games industry. They're indicative of the internet. They're indicative of the, culture of anonymity that the internet provides. So first things is that we need to stop looking at it in this tunnel vision of it's only the video games industry that suffers from these problems. Okay, it's everywhere that suffers from these problems. Go into a YouTube's comments section on any video, and that's what you'll see. So people just need to let go that, if you're going to be on the internet and you're going to have a voice and have an opinion, like I said before, and I didn't bring it up here, but when I was the community manager at IGN, I gave my phone number out in the first day because why do I care? I know that I'm going to get negativity. I know that I'm going to get death threats, but I also know that I'm going to get, people sending me Pokemon pictures and, fun, enjoyable stuff. That's the give and take that comes with the internet. So saying, we need to get away from this stuff. Now, can we condemn and can we demonize people that are continuing to do this stuff? For instance, somebody that I know of that talks about video games, writes about video games, doesn't do it professionally, I don't think, but she had somebody create an entire Facebook page to impersonate her, right? Like that scares the shit out of me, right? And that's something that we should condemn, and that's something that we should figure out better ways to get out of the industry. But secondarily to that, the internet has become so large and Twitter has become so large that it's like, dude, if you want to find pro-Nazi sentiment, you'll find pro-Nazi sentiment. You want to find anti-Nazi sentiment? Well, obviously, you'll find anti-Nazi sentiment. Just about anything, any type of person that you want to find, you can find. And all you have to do is link to their tweet, and then you can generalize an entire group of people around that one particular thing. And I think that that's what's so disappointing about a lot of this stuff, is that I love the South Park episode, about transgenders that kind of put the framework in there, and I was just jamming to the fake Lord song that they did, and one of the lines was, "While you push to find a label that fits me, I'm feeling good on a Wednesday." That is the biggest thing that I think needs to come out a lot of this stuff is if you walked outside and just lived your life, how much of this stuff would affect you? How much of this stuff would really follow you? And those are the things that we need to talk about, those things that do follow you into real life. And when it comes to things like feminism, when it comes to things about, equality in video games, there are a lot of things that for females in the video gaming industry, it does follow them into real life. And we need to figure out how we can stop those things. We need to figure out how we can lessen Twitter abuse, but at the same time, we need to understand that a knee-jerk reaction is a knee-jerk reaction. And let's call it that, If Spin's going to write an article and not watch an episode of South Park and say that they're categorizing Lord as a 45-year-old man when that's not what they're doing at all, we need to call out stuff like this. I've said it a million times to our staff at Pulp. If you want to call yourself a game journalist, call yourself a game journalist. But you better be doing game journalism because people are going to call into question whether or not you're a games journalist. I don't classify myself as a games journalist because I don't do any games fucking journalism. I do games writing, I critique, but I'm not a games journalist. So it's just that level of everyone needs to just kind of take a step back and be a little bit more realistic about what they're asking for.
So that was part one of a two-part conversation with Shaun Allan, former community manager of IGN and founder of Pulp Media, pulp365.com. In many regards, Shaun has demonstrated his expertise in community management by commanding that conversation. And one of the things that resonates the most with me on a personal and a journalistic level is Shaun's plea for accountability in terms of engaging the gaming community at large. Robin, what do you have to add to Shaun's sentiments?
Well, I also thought it was a plea to sanity, really. You can't really have a debate if everyone's really screaming at each other about this. And this is what he was really asking for more than anything else, was everyone to please calm down. Once we're actually calm, we can then actually have that debate.
One of the things that kind of emerges from that conversation, and one of the peculiar sort of issues that I've seen in internal moderation of communities at large lately, is the phrase and the implementation of tone policing. But Shaun, in a lot of ways, makes some pretty reasonable and well-argued points for why we need tone policing in the first place. Robin, just go ahead and get into that, if you will.
Well, as I've said before, tone policing is generally thrown around a little loosely as well. Sometimes it's just somebody making a statement and they can be policed for it because generally somebody considers that some form of harassment, some form of bickering. It's difficult for me to come to that sort of conclusion in many cases.
And that's a big difference between indicting somebody for calling you, like a fucking faggot on the internet, like Shaun points out in the interview. It's literally how someone was referred to. And then there being an instance of actual harassment that crosses a legal line where your life is put in danger or in jeopardy as a result of the vitriolic sort of hate speak or threats.
Oh, indeed. It does actually lessen the idea of harassment for some people. Harassment is, in fact, a crime. It's lessened by someone basically just throwing it around as an accusation. You can't be stalked by a hashtag.
Sure. I mean, you can say that on one level. You can say that lessens the idea of what the word harassment or harasser means. But I feel like, again, taking the lead from Shaun's conversation, there is a point where you're becoming almost an inflated parody of yourself. Nobody is going to take the person seriously who's flinging nothing but verbal fecal matter at another individual to get their point across. I think that that's also fair and safe to say that we know when these things cross into the boundary of what actual harassment is. So it's not so much the word that's been cheapened, so much as it is the dumb jackasses who are using inappropriate words who have cheapened themselves or cheapened the argument at whole that they represent. Do you not sort of see that as a cogent argument?
It's really a way to control the debate for these people. In other words, this is Red Riding Hood, and we're going to have her debating the wolf.
So do you think in a lot of ways that this ability to now label anyone a harasser or say that somebody's guilty of harassment who doesn't agree with your side of an argument is the modern day version of a scarlet letter?
Essentially, yes. I think it's generally better to throw some sort of label on somebody. Generally speaking, we've seen this between the left and the right. We have someone from a strong right-leaning department labeling somebody a liberal, as though once they've said that, you can't listen to this person. But the same can be said for the left doing it to the right.
I think the most important thing to take away from the first part of our conversation with Shaun is that regardless of which side of an opinion you're on, it's critical to conduct yourself and to communicate in a way that actually restores some sanity and some reasonability to discourse in general. I think that's a big thing that's been lost on the generation that was raised on the internet, and lost on a lot of us who have just sort of ingrained the internet into the fabric of our life every day. We forget that the people that we're interacting with on the other side of that screen are human beings, and they're affected by the words that we type. They're affected by the hatred that we pump into their lives, and we're at a point now where the delivery system for these things is as easy as a reach into your pocket. So, I think there is a pretty solid case for us to just be nice to each other, damn it.
Well, there is the counter to that, of course, is that words do have power, but they only have so much, and a lot of that power is decided by the person receiving it. I'd also like to say that when it comes down to it, conversation, just like a debate, requires not just talking but listening too.
Well said.
TYT Community is a fan-based panel of people who love news, politics, and gaming. We are the first TYT Network show to give a fair discussion on Gamergate. We're progressives, libertarians, socialists, and everything in between. And we're looking to take new media by storm. So how can you find us? Well, we do a live YouTube show every Thursday and Friday night. Check us out at youtube.com/TYTNation and make sure to keep an eye out for possible gamer news streams on the weekends. TYT Community, the only TYT Network show paneled by you.
Our next guest, Jenelle Bonanno, is the editor-in-chief of Gamefront.com. She's here to talk to us about the role of positive community building, the role of representation of community in media, and a host of other issues that we've been talking about with some of our other guests. Hey, Jenelle, how are you today?
Hi, Tom. I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. So, for our listeners who kind of need a little refresher course on who you are, just go ahead and give everybody a quick rundown.
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm the current editor-in-chief of Gamefront.com. Prior to that, some of you may know me from The Escapist. I worked there for about 5 years, focusing on community, actually, while I was there, and interactions and branding with community and editorial. I was also the former executive director of the Video Game Bar Association back when I was my days as a lawyer, but I'm currently a recovering lawyer now working full-time in video games media.
Okay, so you've had some experience then in dealing with online communities, the gaming community, and internet and gaming culture in a general way then.
Yes, I've now been working with communities on the internet for roughly 6 to 7 years now.
Okay, so to say that you're something of an expert in how we curate and craft some of those experiences is fair, right?
Yeah, I definitely had my fair share of experiences, yes.
Okay, cool. So if you had to use one word to describe the tone of the conversations that you've seen online this week, what would it be?
Oh, I think for one word, I would say volatile, which generally, in my experience, defines online community conversations. And any time there is topics at large that have a lot of emotion and fan behind them.
Would you say that it is fair or reasonable to assume that the tone of these conversations is just sort of business as usual for internet communities, or are we seeing anything particularly unique lately?
I think it's fair in a sense. You can go to the comment section of almost any site on almost any topic and see arguments at large going back and forth that could range from anywhere from very civil and highly educated to toxic and volatile. I just think that, in recent weeks, we've really seen a lot of light shined on the video game space specifically and what is currently happening there. So there's much more attention being drawn to it.
Okay, and so when somebody like Anita Sarkeesian says Gamergate is just another word for the same group of people who have been harassing me for 2 years, do you find there's credence to that statement? Does that statement hold water, or is she just being hyperbolic and not really realizing the scope and the totality of internet flaming culture in general?
I would say, I don't know her situation specifically, but if she's been experiencing these harassments prior to them being labeled in any sense of the way, then I would say that that's fair.
Certainly, though, the indictment from the mainstream coverage and the mainstream media coverage of the gamer culture and the gamer communities this last week has been a focus on negativity. In your own experience as somebody who's run communities, do you feel like the representation of these things has been a little bit hyperbolic, or do you feel like that's fair?
It depends in your perspective. I think on one sense, making this about specific behavior from a specific group, I think is a little unfair, only because what you're talking about right now is a hashtag. So there's many different voices currently speaking on that hashtag. But I think it is fair to say that there is a tendency for toxic behavior and toxic personality types to permeate gaming communities at large, specifically in areas where there's a lot of sort of that fanboy mentality where people feel very strongly a specific way about games that they have made very personal to themselves. And I think you can go back throughout the years in the gaming community and see this behavior in communities throughout the internet.
One of the biggest examples, I guess, of this in an attempt to curtail this sort of thing, and I bring it up because the League of Legends Championship was just this past weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And League of Legends is well known for having a sort of toxic community at times, but they've taken a lot of measures as a company to audit their user base and to really reinforce, stricter community standards. When do you feel that a company or a media organization that curates comments or gives these people a platform to voice themselves, when do you feel like there's a role for them to step in as advocates for censorship and sort of admonish these people for acting like jerks?
Well, I think at any time when a company creates an online environment for community to exist and thrive in, they also take a incumbency and role that is inherent to that to police and make that community a safe space. I wouldn't normally go so far as to say censorship. I don't think censorship is appropriate under any circumstances, but you do have some sort of role that you must play to keep those communities positive and reinforce a sort of positive behavior and not allow anything that would be considered illegal in any other space. Harassment, bullying, those things would be illegal if I were to, host a gathering in my home and people were together in one place. Harassment would be an illegal activity. And I think if you're going to host a group of people, you should also make sure to try to make that space as safe as possible for those people to thrive in and have a positive place to create community.
And in your opinion, how do we achieve something like that without, like you said, crossing that threshold or that boundary of encroaching on somebody's ability to express themselves freely?
I think there's a couple of ways that we can go about it. Specifically, from my standpoint, we're talking about the internet. But one way that I found to be very effective that we put into place on The Escapist when I worked there is making sure you have a commenting and community system where people have ownership of their online persona. And there's many ways you can do that. You'll see, I find, more toxic behaviors existing in spaces and websites where there is abject anonymity and there's no way to sort of create and curate your own personal profile. Adding the ability for people to have a unique identifying moniker that is theirs at all times, that cannot be used by anyone else, that they can identify with, I find is easily the first step in sort of reducing sort of these toxic behaviors, because people take ownership of that and it reduces the ability of others to kind of come in and mimic other people or pretend to be other people, creating a more hostile environment. I find that when people have a name that they associate with, they really take more seriously that they are a person dealing with other people and what kind of persona they put out there.
So in your experience, do you find that anonymity affords contempt, or is that painting with too broad of a stroke?
I think that's painting with too broad of a stroke. I think anonymity gives certain people the ability to act in ways that they wouldn't normally feel comfortable. And this can be both positive and negative. We've seen a lot of people in our communities through anonymity able to come out and seek advice, ask for help, and really interact with people that they might not feel comfortable doing so otherwise. But on the other hand, anonymity also lends a shield to people who would normally not engage in illegal or toxic behavior otherwise. So I wouldn't say strict anonymity is something we should be endeavoring to get rid of, right? In the example that I gave about, personal monikers and unique identifiers, that can be something as simple as just a handle, but a handle that one can control and own, versus where you see some sites that you just sort of willy-nilly type in any name you want for that sort of comment and not having something that is personal and unique to yourself. So I don't think necessarily we need to get rid of anonymity completely from the internet in order to foster positive communities.
One of the most fascinating things for me being on Twitter, and this is somebody who's been accused of this, is the fact that I clearly use my own name, my own identity, post very real pictures of myself, and have been constantly accused of being a sock puppet, which is sort of a new fascinating trend to me in online argument. Where do you even start to disseminate something like that? Like, where does somebody find the gall or the resolve within themselves to look at somebody and say, well, you may not even exist? And how do you deconstruct that sort of an approach and get to something meaningful out of that?
As a quick aside, one thing that's a really important caveat to having, to what I said about having a unique identifier that people can associate with is two parts. You need to have proper enforcement levels to dissuade inappropriate behavior, and you also need to have unique identifiers of people be unique to themselves as an individual. What do I mean by that? So using The Escapist as an example, because this is where we put this into effect, that we found to be very effective for our community, is that you get one profile and name that you get to use on our site as part of our community and forums. That name is IP checked with your profile, and each individual person is only allowed to have one individual profile to dissuade people from, if shit hits the fan with this profile, I could just make a new one and sort of erase that identity and start afresh. Or, I want to say something toxic, but I don't feel comfortable saying it as myself vis-a-vis the handle I always use. So I'm going to create a secondary or sock puppet account and act in a negative manner there to sort of protect my main account. Disallowing that completely, I found, really reverses that tide. Secondly, and something that Twitter, I think, is terrible at, is proper enforcement of actual rules and regulations that sort of mirror the rules and regulations that we have offline. So if someone is bullying or harassing or threatening people, these are all illegal activities. These accounts should be shut down immediately. And the person who owns that account, if you have a structure where one account per person, should no longer be allowed to have that account anymore, removing them from the community. So you need to have a full structure in place. Not one of these things by itself will never create sort of the positive atmosphere you're looking for. And if you really look into how, once you put these pieces together, how they operate sort of how we have rules and regulations in normal society, right? You are afforded certain rights as an individual, at least speaking from the United States perspective, you are afforded certain rights as an individual, but when those rights infringe on other individuals and society as large in a way that we as a society has said is bad and negative, you no longer have that right to engage in that behavior. And if you continue to engage in that behavior, or your behavior is so egregious, there are strict punishments for them and accountability. It's just simple common sense how we structured societies offline to just really put them into structuring societies online.
Okay. With all that being said, do you think that there's a greater responsibility or a greater pressure for people who are in a position where they have access to a platform to police their tone or to watch what they say more so than, the regular internet user, simply because they're supposed to be examples of the very thing that they're decrying? And a good, solid example of this would be Sam Biddle, from Valleywag, who publicly kind of advocated for the widespread, bullying of gamers this week. Where do you, as a fellow media personality and journalist, find that the line is drawn between, reasonable discourse and fanning a flame?
Well, I think everyone has a responsibility to act in accordance with proper behaviors, both online and offline. And I think in general, it's deplorable to sort of, especially people with platforms, it's deplorable to utilize your platform in a way to incite people to engage in negative behavior of any kind. And I feel this way strongly in all circumstances. I mean, let's talk about just regular freedom of speech, for example. You have the freedom of speech in this country to say whatever you want, but as soon as your speech is considered insightful to an illegal activity, you lose that free speech right, and you are inciting illegal activity. I think the same would go for anyone who would utilize a platform to sort of bring a call to action for others to engage in negative and potentially damaging behavior of any kind. And I think you need to be really aware of what you're saying. And I would say, everyone has that responsibility, but specifically if you have a platform where you know that people will listen to you and engage in whatever behavior or attitude that you are sort of putting out there, you should be very aware of that. And I think it's a little hypocritical for anyone to say we need to end X behavior, so let us all do that by engaging in X behavior, because in my limited view, I feel like this behavior is only okay in this circumstance that I've deemed it to be okay. And in order for us to come together and create positive communities, we need to agree that no, it's never okay.
And do you think a part of that, or maybe a part of what has been lacking in that, has been sort of this dismissal of certain people's like racial or socioeconomic backgrounds or gender backgrounds, depending on which side of specific arguments you're landing on? So, for example, there's been a lot of women who have spoke up on either side of the Gamergate issue, but it seems like for a large number of the pro Gamergate supporters that identify themselves as women, they're being told, well, you have internalized misogyny, you're just a weaponized minority, you're a sock puppet, you're just a means to their agenda. Do you think that there's ever a value to be derived from somebody being that skeptical, or is there simply no value in conversation like that turns to a dismissive tone?
Well, let me be frank in answering this and just say outright that once any person on either side of any conversation takes that tone, you are no longer having a conversation, right? So that is the end of a conversation, whether it be a productive one or not. You have decided that you are no longer conversing with the person you are talking to. You are instead shutting them out and ending the conversation at that moment. So I think there is no benefit to taking that sort of stance. And honestly, if you honestly want to put yourself out there in a position where, hey, I'm here to have a reasonable conversation. Reasonable conversations start with respect, and you must, at some level, respect the other person for having an opinion, even if it's one that you don't agree with. And you need to come to the table willing to try to see their perspective and their side before you can engage in an actual conversation with them. So I think taking those sort of dismissive or condescending or just outright conversation closing comments or mentalities is never helpful for anyone, because what we need is conversation in all sorts of areas that we discuss high emotion and topics, for lack of a better word. And in that sense, you need to be able to be open to a conversation and not shut it down.
So that was Jenelle Bonanno from Defy Media. And
Lovely
one of the
lady.
things... Yeah, absolutely. And quite remarkably intelligent in terms of how she expressed her opinion on a lot of the things that I think a lot of other people are feeling, but maybe don't have the ability to put into such eloquence.
You know what I was thinking? She could have been saying that about almost any level of discourse on the internet in general. It wasn't just particular to just gaming. It could have been almost any conversation about any subject on Twitter.
Yeah, it's sort of ubiquitous commentary. I mean, and the other thing that kind of fascinates the hell out of me about not just Gamergate, not just internet culture, but people in general, is you have a big section of people that will literally get insulted at the prospect of being told to chill out.
Yeah, it is strange.
Yeah, I don't get that.
Well, I suppose it's almost like a defense mechanism in order for you to continue insulting. You've got yourself into this position when somebody asks you to chill out, you just say, well, you're just basically trying to shut me up. And then it just gives you the excuse to carry on.
It does seem like a mechanism bred out of self-preservation of idiocy.
Have we got ourselves to that point now? Oh dear.
Well, I mean, I think she makes a pretty cogent argument for a lot of the ways that we can dig ourselves out of that hole.
I mean, it's a back and forth, of course. I mean, when someone says about incitement, for example, it's exactly what others don't want to hear. A lot of the time is when somebody's saying you're inciting this or you're inciting that. In many cases, I mean, freedom of speech in general, it's not built around what you want to hear. It's built specifically for what you don't want to hear. People can use incitement, very, very similar, as you were saying, with the self-preservation thing, as a means to sort of cull conversation in that particular topic, whatever it may be.
I think what's kind of fascinating, too, is you have two people in this show that are community experts by every stretch of the word. And their sentiments are very similar, very parallel. And, we know for a fact these people didn't have this conversation in the same room with each other. There wasn't a way for them to pass notes to each other.
Well, any community, when it comes down to it, is community management. And one of those is, of course, is basically making sure that you're there as a vehicle for discourse.
Like I said, what's kind of telling to me is that you have both of these people who are in the business of doing what the other person does, and they're both saying largely the same thing.
It's interesting when it comes to gaming, for example, because gamers traditionally have been somewhat bullied over the last 30 or so years. Not necessarily physically, but in many cases verbally. And a lot of people, certainly in the gamergate circles at the moment, feel as if the bullies are now invading that particular space. They're coming for you, So you can understand a certain level of wariness. It's I often said that there's at the moment we've got a sense that there's people that are basically trying to lose the loser. The idea of a lot of these kids have been told that they're losers simply for their own hobby, and now that this hobby has come to a point where it's actually getting cool, the cool kids are coming in, and they almost want to get rid of the loser element. When these are the people that built it, you can understand why people might be defensive.
I can and I can't. I mean, on another level, it's like to sit there and say that they're this underrepresented subgenre or subculture is a little disingenuous at this point. Look, 1 in 2 households in America owns a game console. That's 128 million people. Of that, 51% are women. It's not this little sliver of people anymore. So I think on another level, and then just look at the numbers. Look at the financial numbers. We're talking about just in the U.S. market alone, $22 billion a year. This is a megalith. So to say that these people are kind of underrepresented anymore, I think is the case of that maybe some people in the opposition are making. This wouldn't necessarily be my opinion, so to say, but I can kind of understand how maybe some of the antithetical sentiment comes down to something like, well, you guys are in control of one of the largest entertainment mediums in the entire world. How can you say that you're this marginalized little sliver of a group when you control it globally, an $80 billion, a year industry?
Well, I could answer that in the idea that it's not so much the gamers that are the ones that are being represented, but the games themselves. Do you see what I mean?
Sure. Do you feel like then the games are an accurate and fair portrayal of what gamers are?
Well, no. I think that the games themselves are more of an accurate representation of really what they actually represent, depending on the game, of course. You've got plenty of different games from loads of different genres now. I mean, as far as gaming is concerned, it's always been quite diverse. There's always somebody out there that's trying to make something new out of it. But generally speaking, the real people that make these games are usually the hardcore gamers. These are the people that are actually producing the games as well as just playing them. Almost, I couldn't name you one person that isn't working in the gaming industry, really, that isn't really into games, if you see what I mean.
I think what really becomes clear, though, from a lot of these conversations, not only with these developers, with community management, with people from a number of these high-profile sites, but just conversations between yourself and myself is, gaming culture right now is in something of an identity crisis.
Perhaps, yeah.
We're struggling to find out who we are. As you said, we're grown up now, and a lot of the times when you're shoved into adulthood, it's really scary and intimidating. And I think in a big way, our industry has finally hit that moment in time where it's like, well, crap, we all grew up. What do we do now?
Well, yeah, this is one of the things I was thinking is that, as I was saying, we're not growing it as such as we've grown. It's got to that point now where games are available for everybody. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily for the older player. If you look at those statistics, you'll find that it basically breaks off at around the mid-30s region. So people over that age, people going into 35 to 40s and 50s, they're sort of left in a sort of a quandary where they certainly don't know where they are. They're underrepresented within the gaming community, let's say. We have got people who are over their 30s in the gaming sector, but they are underrepresented in that. I would love to see a lot more games that are built really for a much older adult audience. Well, I'd like to see more games that are built for someone who's really willing to digest a good book, and a big book. Something of real depth. I think that's one of the places in gaming that is lacking, really.
I mean, I get that, and I understand that craving for something more mature, but at the same time, look at Grand Theft Auto 5. The majority of the protagonists in that game are within that age range that you specify, and it's one of the highest selling media properties of all time, consistently. Even the last installment of Grand Theft Auto featured a protagonist that was obviously in his late 30s or relatively easy to gesticulate that he was in his early 40s. So I think maybe there is something to be said about the power of these narratives that involve older people, that, the message translates all the way down to the 17, 18, 19-year-old kid.
I just
get something out of that older guy being in control of the game or in control of the narrative.
Well, yeah, I can't wait to Grand Theft Auto 7 when it's like this 60-year-old guy trying to run around and gun. That would be brilliant,
I mean, if they keep up with their impeccable production standards, I'm sure it'll sell just as many boatloads of copies.
Yes, Grand Theft Auto 8 on a Zimmer frame.
So do you think really, any story can be told as long as it's told well? Obviously there's mega bucks behind that game franchise, but they get something out of it every time. And, they took really giant risks with the last iteration of the series, despite, the core gameplay you're going to be stealing cars, but there's 3 people you can switch from at any given time. And like I said, all of them they're not young men by any measure.
Well, I suppose it probably echoes the age range of the people that are doing this. These guys have been doing this for quite some time now. It's almost like a life's work for them, really. I mean, I remember the first GTA, the top-down version. It was just basically a guy just running around and just, running over people just for the fun of it almost. Now we've got to a point where these guys are really wanting to explore some severe storylines. So I think the game has grown up with the designers as they've gone. So as I say, it will be interesting to see how they come out with their next thing. I don't see them stopping. Do you?
Well, I think really what it all comes down to is the buyer buys what the buyer buys. It's the market that speaks for itself.
I'm not so sure when it comes to GTA. I think they're a sardonic bunch, and they've got that sort of fuck you attitude that sort of comes through in the game. Really, they're basically taking a pot shot at the entire planet.
Yeah, I get that it's a punch up, but I mean, like you said, they are still obviously dealing with some very intriguing and serious adult subjects in those games. Grand Theft Auto 4 was a deconstruction of the war in Afghanistan as told by a Russian immigrant. That's definitely not, nighttime story material.
Oh, I'd love to read that to my child, wouldn't you?
So with all that being said, we're about to get into a conversation that is going to be exclusive only to the Digital Carbon Pack members. We're going to be talking about hatred, because we had a brief conversation with Jenelle about hatred. But again, you're not going to hear it unless you've signed up for the awesome shiny Digital Carbon Pack. So with that being said, it's me, Steve Tom Sawyer. It is Robin Gething.
That's me.
And we will check you guys later. This episode of Carbon Based Gaming Radio was brought to you by TYT Community. Sound engineering support provided by Sturbridge Sound.
Carbon Based Gaming Radio would like to take this time to remind you to go down to your local library and read a book. It's good for you.